Thanks, Diane. Let's start with a little bit of background and talk briefly about why standards for competitive foods are important. Because a significant portion of calories are consumed by children at school, improving the nutritional profile of all foods sold in school beyond the reimbursable meals is critical to improve the diets and overall health of American children. An increasing body of research tells us that giving school children healthy food options through strong competitive food standards will help them make healthier choices during the day and can reduce their risk for obesity. The Smart Snack standards were designed to align with and complement the efforts to improve nutrition already underway by school food service under the recently updated school meal patterns. Together, the school meal standards and the competitive food standards support the goal of improving the nutrition environment of our nation's schools and of making the healthy choice the easy choice for our kids. As everyone is probably aware, the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act authorized USDA to establish nutrition standards for all foods and beverages sold outside of the federal child nutrition programs in schools. This slide lists the formal name of the rule and also provides a link to the rule itself. Remember, an interim final rule is an implementing rule, which means that it must be put into effect on the date specified, which is July 1st, 2014. Although the formal comment period has ended, USDA is encouraging informal input during actual implementation of the new requirements in order to help them develop a final rule. Please note that with the implementation of Smart Snack standards on July 1st, the foods of minimal nutritional value standards will no longer apply. As Diane already mentioned, earlier this year it looked like there would be an option for a one-year waiver from the Smart Snack and possibly the new school breakfast program requirements. However, USDA has confirmed that they are prohibited by federal law from waiving these regulations or from authorizing state agencies to do so. So the end result is that USDA will not be providing waivers for Smart Snacks or school breakfast. We want to make sure that everyone is clear on that. The standards for food and beverages in this interim final rule represent minimum standards that local educational agencies, school food authorities, and schools must meet for foods sold in school. Local educational agencies do have the discretion to establish their own standards for competitive foods sold to children, as long as those standards are consistent with the minimum standards established by federal regulation. PDE does not plan to institute stricter guidelines for competitive foods sold to students, but your local school or district, if desired, is permitted to include stronger guidelines for competitive foods, and these typically would be included in the local wellness policy or the administrative guidelines that accompany a wellness policy. Now that we've provided some background on the standards, let's start looking in detail at the new requirements. First, it's important to note that the interim rule includes several new definitions that apply to the regulations for competitive food service in schools. Competitive foods, as they apply to the Smart Snacks rule, are defined as all foods and beverages sold to students outside of the reimbursable meals on the school campus and at any time during the school day. The first main point here is that Smart Snack standards only apply to foods and beverages sold to students, which means that the exchange of money, tokens, or the use of some type of prepaid account is being used to purchase the item. Competitive foods include items sold a la carte, in vending machines, at school stores, at fundraisers, or at any other venue that sells food to students at school during the school day. And we will be addressing fundraisers in a little more detail in an upcoming slide. Keep in mind that foods that may simply be offered at school, for example, as a classroom reward or as treats during a holiday party or a classroom celebration, do not fall under these standards because they are not items that are sold to students. Also note that these standards do not apply to any foods brought from home for personal consumption, such as bagged lunches. As a reminder, your local wellness policy is required by federal law to contain nutrition guidelines for all foods available to students on the school campus. So nutrition standards for non-sold sources of food or beverage that may be available or offered to students at school should be addressed in the school or district's local wellness policy. Again, we're talking about things like classroom rewards, foods that might be offered at a birthday party, and so on. Schools are expected to follow the guidelines that they establish in their wellness policies. We realize that wellness policies will need updates to address the Smart Snack standards, and PDE will be providing guidance on updating your local wellness policies once the local wellness policy final regulation is released. As I mentioned, the federal competitive food standards only apply to items sold on the school campus, meaning all areas of the property under the school's jurisdiction that are accessible to students during the school day. For the purposes of Smart Snacks, the school day refers to the period from the midnight before to 30 minutes after the end of the official school day. For example, if a school dismisses each day at 3 o'clock, then the standards would apply from midnight that day until 3:30 p.m., which is 30 minutes after dismissal. Specifying the period of midnight before ensures that the competitive food standards will apply to foods sold in the morning, including the school breakfast program meal service, and then will extend through the end of the official school day and dismissal. Some people have asked whether food items for sale within a faculty lounge would need to comply with the Smart Snack standards. Because the faculty lounge is an area of the school reserved for the exclusive use of the faculty and staff, and not accessible to students during the school day, the nutrition standards would not apply to foods for sale strictly to teachers in a faculty lounge, for example, in a vending machine located there. The intent of these definitions of school day and school campus deal exclusively with the application of the food standards and are intended to have no impact whatsoever on any definition of instructional day or school campus that is established by the state or an LEA or school for other purposes. And while USDA's authority does not extend beyond the school day, local school districts have the discretion to apply Smart Snack standards during after-school, evening, and weekend activities on campus, should they wish to do so. In the next several slides, we will outline the nutrition standards for competitive foods. Later on in the presentation, we will discuss the standards for beverages. So first, let's get an overview of the standards. The nutrition standards for foods sold in schools apply consistently to all grade levels. The rule contains both general standards and specific nutrient standards, as well as exemptions from certain nutrient standards for some specific foods that are considered to be foods to encourage. In addition, the rule provides broad exemptions for fruits and vegetables and a day of service and following day exemption for entree items that are served as part of a reimbursable meal under the National School Lunch Program or School Breakfast Program. We will discuss these exemptions after we go through the basic requirements. There are two standards that must be met for a competitive food item, the general standard and the nutrient standards. We're going to begin first with the general standard. And keep in mind as we go through the four criteria that a food item must meet only one of the four general standards. To be allowable under the general standards, a competitive food item must be a whole grain rich product or contain one of the other major food groups as the first ingredient, including a fruit, vegetable, dairy product, or protein food, or be a combination food containing at least 1/4 cup fruit and or vegetable, or contain 10% of the daily value of one nutrient of public health concern. And this last one is only good through June 30th, 2016, so only for the first 2 years. In the case of a food item with water as the first ingredient, the second ingredient must be one of items 1, 2, or 3 listed on the slide. We will go through each of the categories one by one, starting with number 1, be a whole grain rich product. To be allowable as a competitive food, a grain product must contain 50% or more whole grains by weight, or have whole grains as the first ingredient. This information is easily obtained by reading a product label, and we will look at an example of this shortly. The whole grain rich standard under Smart Snacks is consistent with the meal pattern standards and the Healthier U.S. School Challenge whole grain rich requirement for 50% of the product being whole grain. The second way a competitive food can qualify as allowable under Smart Snacks is if it has as the first ingredient one of the other non-grain main food groups: fruit, vegetable, dairy product, or protein food. If you haven't already noticed, the first and second criteria for the general standard are based upon the food groups we're all familiar with on My Plate and the recommendations of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans: whole grains, fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy, and lean proteins. And again, if water is the first ingredient of your item, then the second ingredient must consist of an item that belongs to one of these food groups or be a whole grain rich item. The next way a competitive food can be allowable is if it is a competitive food with at least 1/4 cup of fruit and or vegetable in it. Remember, a combination food is an item that contains 2 or more components representing 2 or more of the recommended food groups. Again, we're talking about fruit, vegetable, dairy, protein, or grain. Some examples of combination foods that could contain 1/4 cup of fruit and or vegetable and might fall within Smart Snack standards in the appropriate portion size are a blueberry muffin containing 1/4 cup of blueberries. That's a combination of grain and fruit. Hummus and vegetables, a combination of protein and vegetable. Fruit and yogurt, which is fruit and a protein. Fruit cobbler with oatmeal crust, fruit and grain. And tortilla chips with salsa, which is a grain and a vegetable combination. The final general standard criterion that allows a competitive food to be sold at school is that the product contains 10% of the daily value of a nutrient of public health concern, which is based upon the most current dietary guidelines for Americans and includes calcium, potassium, vitamin D, and dietary fiber. This criterion is meant to allow school food authorities to utilize a more phased-in approach as they adjust to the Smart Snack standards. This criterion is only in place for the first 2 years of implementation until July 1st, 2016. USDA is allowing this criterion for the first 2 years to provide time for manufacturers with products that would not qualify under the other criteria to reformulate products if desired. After June 30th, 2016, a competitive food must qualify on the basis of being a whole grain rich product, having one of the non-grain main food groups as the first ingredient, or a combination food with at least 1/4 cup fruit and or vegetable. Once we determine that the food item meets one of the 4 general standards, next we have to make sure that it meets each of the 6 nutrient standards as well. There are 6 specific nutrient standards that must be met, including total fat, saturated fat, trans fat, sodium, calories, and total sugar. It is important to note that the nutrient standards need to be determined based on the item as packaged or served to the student. So in looking at your food label, you have to look at the number of servings in the package. If the nutrition label on the item indicates that the package contains 2 servings, for example, this will mean that the calories, grams, and milligrams listed for the other nutrients have to be multiplied by 2. The nutrient standards must also include any accompaniments that are a part of the food item being served, such as salad dressings, butter or jelly on toast, cream cheese on bagels, sugar and creamer at a coffee bar, and so on. These must be included in the nutrient profile as part of the item served. Pre-portioning is not required. Instead, schools may establish that the food served meets the competitive food standards by determining the average portion of the accompaniments used and adding the nutrients to the profile of the food item that the accompaniment is served with. This is similar to the approach schools have used for nutrient analysis of meals. Under the interim final rule, foods are required to contain no more than 35% of total calories from fat per item as packaged or served. There are some exemptions to this total fat limit for certain foods, including reduced fat and part skim mozzarella cheeses, nuts and seeds and nut seed butters, products consisting of only dried fruits with nuts and/or seeds with no added nutritive sweeteners or fat, and seafood with no added fat. Now, these exemptions would not extend to combination foods that contain these exempt foods packaged together with other non-exempt foods, such as peanut butter and crackers, since the crackers are not exempt, or trail mix consisting of nuts, raisins, and chocolate chips, because chocolate chips are not exempt. In other words, these types of combinations would have to meet the general and all nutrient standards in order to be allowable. In addition to the total fat requirement, there are requirements for saturated fats and trans fat in competitive foods. Foods eligible to be sold must derive less than 10% of their calories from saturated fat. This means that an item with exactly 10% of its calories from saturated fat would not meet the standard. The highest an item can be is 9.9% of calories from saturated fat. And we'll take a closer look at this on the next slide when we do a sample calculation. The rule again exempts reduced fat cheese and part skim mozzarella cheese from the saturated fat standard. And because nuts and seeds contain healthier fats, the rule also includes nuts and seeds and nut seed butters as exempt from the saturated fat standard. Nuts and seeds are also exempt in combination with dried fruit and containing no added nutritive sweeteners or fats. The trans fat content of a competitive food must be 0 grams of trans fat per portion as packaged. Because of FDA labeling rules, an item with less than 0.5 grams of trans fat as served is allowable. Also, naturally occurring trans fats, which can be found in some beef, lamb, and butter fat, are permitted. Now we would like to take you through some example calculations for the percentage of calories from total fat and the percentage of calories from saturated fat. The percentages for total fat, saturated fat, and also sugar, which we will show you on an upcoming slide, cannot be taken directly from the nutrition facts panel. So it's very important that everyone understands where these percentages come from and how to do the calculations. In an upcoming slide, however, we will also show you an easy, user-friendly tool that you can use to do these calculations for you. So please do not worry if the calculations seem a bit overwhelming, because the calculator can do the work for you. We'll begin with calculating the percentage of calories from total fat. As stated at the top of the slide, there are 2 methods for calculating the percentage of calories from fat in an item using the information found on the Nutrition Facts panel. The Nutrition Facts panel includes total fat in 2 places. First, listed as calories from fat near the top right, indicated by the red arrow on the slide, and second, listed in grams with the other nutrients indicated on our label by the green arrow. The percent of calories from fat may be calculated using either of these numbers. To calculate using the first method, the calories from fat information, take the calories from fat listed on the label, the red arrow, divide by the total calories in the item, indicated by the purple arrow, then multiply by 100 to make it a percentage. To use method 2, the grams of total fat method, take the grams of fat on the label, indicated by the green arrow, and multiply by 9, which is the calories in each gram of fat. Divide that result by the total calories in the item, and then multiply by 100 to get a percentage. If either one of these methods results in 35% or less of calories from total fat, then the item meets this standard. When doing calculations, do not round your answers. USDA suggests using the calories from fat, the first method, first, because it is a simpler calculation. And only if the item does not meet by that method would you then need to go ahead and try method 2. So now let's plug in the information from our label. To calculate using the first method, the calories from fat information, take the calories from fat on the label, our red arrow, which indicates 50, divide by the total calories in the item, which is 140 calories, indicated by the purple arrow, then multiply by 100 to make it a percentage. This gives us the result of 35.7% of calories from fat. Using this method, our item does not meet the total fat standard, so we need to try method 2. To use method 2, the grams of total fat method, take the grams of fat on the label, which is 5, indicated by the green arrow, and multiply by 9 the calories in each gram of fat, divide that result by the total calories in the item, 140, then multiply by 100 to get a percentage. So the calculation would be 5 grams times 9 calories per gram divided by 140 calories times 100 to give us 32.1% of calories from fat. As you can see from our example, these two methods will often provide slightly different results because the FDA has different rounding rules for the labeling of each of these nutrients on the nutrition facts panel. But remember, if either method results in less than or equal to 35% of calories from fat, the product will meet the total fat standard. It is important not to round the result. Our item here passes the total fat requirement since the result using the grams of total fat is less than or equal to 35%. Next, we're going to run through the calculation for the percent of calories from saturated fat in a food item. There's only one method for calculating saturated fat because of what information is provided on the nutrition facts label. And this method is the same as the second method we just used for total fat. To calculate the percentage of calories from saturated fat, you'll take the grams of saturated fat indicated by the blue arrow, multiply by 9, again that's the calories in each gram of saturated fat, divide that result by the total calories in the item, which is shown at the purple arrow, then multiply by 100 to get a percentage. So using our example label, the calculation would be 0.5 grams times 9 calories per gram divided by 140 calories in the item times 100, which gives us 3.2%. Again, do not round the result, especially because the standard is less than 10% of calories from saturated fat. And this means that a product that with up to 9.9% of calories from saturated fat will meet the standards. Before we review the next two nutrient standards, which are sodium and calories, let's take a moment to discuss the definition of an entree as it relates to Smart Snacks. Both sodium and calories have different allowable levels for entrees versus side dishes and snack items. So we want to make sure everyone knows how USDA defines an entree item in the interim final rule. An entree item means a combination of a meat or meat alternate and a whole grain rich food. For example, a peanut butter sandwich made on whole wheat bread, or a combination food of fruit or vegetables and a meat alternate. An example would be a chicken and vegetable stir fry, or a meat alternate served alone. And an example of this could be a grilled chicken breast served by itself. Some meat alternates, such as yogurt, cheese, nuts, seeds, and nut butters, are excluded from the definition of entree because they are typically snack items and would not be appropriate if offered in entree-sized portions. In addition, meat snack items such as dried meat jerky and meat sticks are also excluded from the definition of an entree. The interim final rule does not include grain-only items in the definition of entree item. However, the Food and Nutrition Service at USDA in a recent memo gave additional guidance on grain-only items as breakfast entrees because they recognize that there are many grain-only entree items that are healthy choices that students are accustomed to having for breakfast. Therefore, a school food authority is permitted to determine which items are the entree items for breakfast offered as part of the school breakfast program. So for example, if a school serves whole grain rich pancakes as the main dish for breakfast in the school breakfast program, then these pancakes can be considered an entree under Smart Snacks. Now let's take a look at the sodium requirements. The rule includes two sodium standards, one standard for snack and side items, and another standard for items considered to be entrees, which we defined on the previous slides. As with the other nutrient standards, sodium is measured for the food item as packaged or served and must include accompaniments in the calculation. The amount of sodium can be taken from the information provided on the nutrition facts panel. Again, remember to be mindful of the number of servings in one package when looking at each of the nutrient standards. For example, if there are 2 granola bars in one package and the serving size is listed as 1 granola bar, you would need to multiply the milligrams of sodium by 2 to obtain the sodium content for the entire package as it is served. In order to address concerns about availability and acceptance of lower sodium options, the interim final rule sets an initial limit for sodium at 230 milligrams for snacks and side dishes as packaged or served for the first 2 years of implementation of the standards. USDA allowed the initial sodium limit to give manufacturers time to reformulate or develop new products, as well as time for children to adapt to new flavor profiles in foods. Beginning July 1st, 2016, the sodium limit for snacks and side dishes is reduced to 200 milligrams per item as packaged or served. The sodium limit for entrees that do not qualify under the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program exemption that we will discuss in a few moments is no more than 480 milligrams of sodium per item as served. Foods must also comply with standards for calories to be allowable. Calories in snack items and side dishes are limited to less than or equal to 200 calories as packaged or served, including accompaniments. Entree items that are sold a la carte must be less than or equal to 350 calories per item as served, including accompaniments. Again, as we will discuss in a later slide, entree items that are part of the reimbursable meal, but also sold a la carte, would not be subject to these limits on the day of or the day after they are served in the meal. The final nutrition standard is total sugar. The total sugar of an item, as with total fat and saturated fat, must be calculated. You cannot obtain the percent of sugar by weight directly from the nutrition facts panel. The interim final rule allows for 35% or less of the weight of an allowable competitive food to come from total sugars. On the next slide, we will demonstrate how to do the calculation. As we will discuss shortly, fresh, frozen, and canned fruits are exempt from all of the nutrition standards. However, dried fruits can also be a nutrient-dense snack in appropriate portion sizes. Therefore, this rule expands the dried fruit exemptions from the sugar requirement to allow for certain dried fruits with added nutritive sweeteners. This would be in cases where such sweeteners are required for processing and palatability, and examples include dried cranberries, tart cherries, and blueberries. And we do expect further guidance from USDA on this exemption to the total sugar standard. So to calculate the percentage of sugar by weight, first we'll locate the number of grams of sugar on the nutrition facts label, which is indicated by the green arrow on our example. Next, you will divide the grams of sugar by the total weight of the food serving in grams, which is indicated by the red arrow near the top of the nutrition facts label. As with the fat calculations, do not round your answer. Using the numbers from this product's nutrition facts label, the calculation would be 2 grams of sugar divided by 28 grams per serving times 100 to get a percentage, which equals 7.14%. Because the total sugar of this item is not more than 35% by weight, this item meets the sugar standard. Now I'm going to turn over the presentation to Kathleen, who's going to begin by talking about some of the exemptions.
Okay.